If you are like me, then you have read or heard the passage in Mark 11, Luke 19 and John 12 many times. It's called the triumphal entry because it's the story of how Jesus entered Jerusalem in the last week of his life, and it looked like everything was going to God's plan. The people of Israel had recognized Jesus as the Messiah of prophecy and were flocking in their hundreds to the east side of Jerusalem as they had heard that Jesus was entering the city on the back of a white colt, just as Zechariah had predicted that the Messiah would do. Zechariah 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon a donkey, and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey." From Bethany, at the top of the Mount of Olives, Jesus rode a white colt donkey down the slopes of the Mount of Olives, through a cemetery between the tombs of the Old Testament prophets, and up the other side, through the eastern golden gate of the city of Jerusalem and into the temple grounds. An interesting note here is that today the golden gate is sealed. Muslims, knowing that the Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah and still hold to this prophecy of the Messiah someday soon entering the city through this gate, filled the gate with human remains and bricked it up. They know that Israelites also believe that if any Jew touches a cadaver, he will be unclean for a week and must leave the city, thus preventing the Messiah from ever being able to enter Jerusalem and become king. Back to our story. Right in the middle of this event there is a strange verse. The Pharisees confront Jesus and tell him to rebuke the people for calling him the Messiah, to which Jesus makes what seems to us a strange reply. In Luke 19:40 it says, "I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out." 1,000 times I have read and heard this verse and giggled as I have always pictured the stones literally opening their little mouths and crying out. But any Jerusalemite, and after all that is who this passage was directed to, would immediately have a very different image when he reads this. The key is found in another Old Testament passage. Jews hold yet this truth very literally, and it can be found in Isaiah 56, verses 3 to 5. In verse 3 it says, "To the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord, even unto them will I give mine house, and within my walls a place and a name, better than sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall never be cut off." A place and a name in Hebrew is Yad Vashem. From this one verse, Jews have built up an entire belief system. They believe that if you provide a special place and write down the names of those that have died loving God, no matter who they are or where they have died, God will not forget them and they will be saved in heaven. For this reason, just walking distance from the old city of Jerusalem is a very special memorial called Yad Vashem, a place and a name, that remembers not only the 6 million Holocaust victims, but also the righteous amongst the nations. Those are Gentiles that have risked their lives to save Jews during the Second World War. One particularly moving pavilion in the Yad Vashem is the Children's Memorial. Inside the door is a single candle, reflected off specially angled mirrors to represent the 1 million children murdered by the Nazis. As you gaze at the moving sight, the 1 million names of the lost children are read out to you on an eternally running recording. In this way, the Jews have prepared a special place and recorded the names of these children, so that even though they were murdered in faraway countries like Poland and Germany, and their bodies were burnt and their ashes buried in unmarked graves, God will not forget them, and they will be saved in heaven because their names are recorded in a special place, Yad Vashem. The Hall of Names is another pavilion with the names of the 5 million Jews, the adults that were murdered by the Germans. It contains a display of hundreds of photos of the lost. Again, their bodies cannot be found or identified, but they are saved in Jewish thought as their names are recorded in a special place, Yad Vashem. You'll recall that Isaiah 56:3 says that this is even true for foreigners, non-Jews or Gentiles. So the Jewish people have provided a pavilion dedicated to the righteous among the nations. Here are hundreds of almond trees, each with a sign in English and Hebrew, recording the names in a specific place of every foreigner who risked their lives to save Jews. A well-known sign and tree is that of Oskar Schindler, an SS Nazi who saved many Jews through his munitions factory. A well-known movie, Schindler's List, was made about him. There is also a memorial to Theunis Wilhelmus Lentjes from the Netherlands. You may never have heard of him, but I'm proud to say he's my grandfather. He was forced to drive for the Nazis in Holland during the war, but he used his position of trust to save many Jewish prisoners and downed American and English pilots, who he ferried to freedom through the Dutch underground. He was arrested and survived being shot a couple of times while aiding the Jews. Eventually he moved his family to Australia for safety from the reprisals of the Nazis, and that's how my father met my mother. My mother and brother will be travelling to Victoria soon on the birth anniversary of her father, the hero that's remembered in Yad Vashem in Israel, specifically to place white stones on his grave. In Israel, an almond tree stands representing the many lives that exist today because of his selfless acts of bravery. So back to our strange text, where Jesus is passing through the cemetery on his way to enter Jerusalem. Many of the tombs here, all made of white Jerusalem stone, have no bodies inside. These people died in foreign countries or lost at sea, but as we have seen, to a Jew there only needs to be a place, in this case a cemetery, and the name of the victim written to be assured that they will be remembered by God and saved in heaven. When you look closely at these tombs, you notice that they are covered in small white stones. In Israel, mourners do not put flowers on graves, as it's so hot and dry, the flowers would immediately wilt. So they put white stones on the tomb, which are plentiful and eternal. It's a sign of respect that you knew the deceased intimately, and that you will remember them and you will not forget them. So when Jesus was passing through this cemetery, containing the tombs of the great prophets, and the Pharisees told him to quieten his followers, Jesus replied by saying, even if these living people should be quiet, these white stones, representing the dead prophets, are crying out who I am. They have prophesied that I'd be here today. Men like Isaiah prophesied that I would be riding a white colt through this cemetery this day. I am who they say I am, the Messiah, the Son of God. This is how an Israeli would see this verse, not singing stones. Let's end by looking at one special verse. Revelation 2:17 says, He that hath an ear, let him hear. To him that overcometh I will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth, saving he that receiveth it. Most of the changed names in the Bible are changed by God, as the person's character changed as a result of knowing God personally. For example, Abram became Abraham. His name changed from High Father to Father of Many in Genesis 17:5. Sarai became Sarah, meaning my princess, changed to the Mother of all Nations in Genesis 17:15. Jacob became Israel. In other words, his name, which meant supplanter, was changed to He who has the power of God in Genesis 32:28. And Simon became Peter, from God has heard to Pebble in John 1:42. On the day that Jesus returns, he will hand each one of us personally a white stone. On that stone will be a new name written, your new name which represents your new heavenly character. No one else will be able to read that name or understand it. Just you and God, a secret between the two of you, an intimate gesture.